Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 formerly popular works that seem to have lost their luster. They faded from the repertoire. We hear them about much less frequently than we used to. Some of these you may agree with, some you may disagree with, and you may want to propose some of your own that you don't see as much as you think you ought to, or that you used to. I mean, we're not you ought to. This is not an ought thing. This is, yes, they were there, and now they're not, or at least not as much. Now, this topic came up. One of you proposed that we do it, but it was in conjunction with, I believe, the Franck D minor symphony, because that's one of those symphonies that everybody used to do all the time, but it seems to be subject to the vagaries of fashion. And actually, there have been quite a few new recordings of it in recent epochs, often in connection with box sets of like Franck editions and things like that. And the most recent one, of course, just came out, was Jean-Luc Tango's on Naxos, which was okay. I mean, it was good, but not fabulous. But that work seems to be undergoing a little bit of a comeback. I don't know, at least on disc. I could be wrong. But it's one of those tough pieces that seems to have, it comes and goes. It ebbs and flows, like the waves on the shore. So here we have, 10 works that I remember as having been quite popular in the day and aren't so much now. All of us have different memories and different life experiences, so we may have different views, and I welcome yours. Number 1, Goldmark, the Rustic Wedding Symphony. Such a beautiful, wonderful, lovely piece. It was enormously popular when Goldmark wrote it back in like the 1870s or so, and it stayed popular, well, really until like Bernstein and Abravanel recorded it. Then there were a couple digital ones. Lopez Cobos did it, I believe, and maybe one or two others. But it never gets much love, and I don't understand why not. It's as pretty a piece as anybody ever wrote. And if you like, Dvorak and that sort of school, the quasi-Slavic nationalist school, you're gonna love this piece. It's just a knockout. So it obviously deserves to make a comeback, but I don't see that happening. I think today's audiences are much too uptight, to simply sit back, relax, and enjoy this just melodious and effervescent view of a peasant wedding. That's gorgeous. Nowadays, if you want a peasant wedding, you do like Les Noces, something hard driving and modern. But it's beautiful. The opening, da 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 ba da dum bum ba da. Opening variations. I mean, it's a tune you never get out of your head. It's wild. Next, Dandy, the Symphony on a French Mountain Air, which I've talked about a few times here in discussing Dandy. I actually had my orchestra play this piece. I've told you I played cymbals in it. What a beautiful work. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. It's really Dandy's masterpiece orchestrally. I don't care what anyone says. And it's a true piano concerto. The problem is, as I pointed out in those discussions, is that the piano part is so difficult and it's not called a concerto. So it's very hard to find soloists who are willing to play it and who are willing to learn it. And if they are willing to learn it, they take it for granted and they think, well, it's an orchestral piano part. How tough can it be? And then they look at it and they try to play it and they have issues and they can't learn it in time. And, we had that actual experience. So, yeah. But it's wonderful and beautiful and tuneful and fun. It actually has a sense of humor at the end. I mean, Dandy was not known for his humor. And it's delicious. Next, the Grieg Piano Concerto. Well, I mean, talk about a piece that used to be ubiquitous and has become markedly less so. And here there's a very interesting phenomenon. I think the phenomenon here is that there has been a fragmentation of the classical music world, especially when it comes to romantic nationalism. I mean, it was fine for Norway, the country, to claim the Grieg Piano Concerto as like one of the greatest products of its greatest composer and native son, etc., etc. But there really weren't any Norwegian pianists. Not a lot of them. Not with international reputations. So everybody played it. It was popular and lovely. Made a great coupling on disc with the Schumann Concerto, which it sounds a lot like and was its model. It was perfect. Now you've got some really first-class Norwegian pianists, and they have recaptured the concerto for Norway for themselves. And as a result of that, it's become something of a specialty piece for Norwegian pianists to use as their calling card. And other pianists are a little bit hesitant to do, to take it on, I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it gets played constantly still. I don't see orchestral programs from like all over the universe. But I do see that it seems to have all but vanished from recordings, at least in the way that it used to be available, because every pianist had to do the Grieg, every single one, without exception. And they all did. I mean, I grew up with like Philippe Entremont playing the Grieg with Eugene Ormandy. That's what it was, a totally international piece. Now it's a national piece again, which has limited the amount of exposure it gets. Terrible, tragic irony, I think, don't you? Next, Khachaturian's concertos. Well, Khachaturian, of course, was a composer of extremely modest abilities whose best works are his ballets. I mean, hands down, Spartacus and Gania and whatever you call it, those are beautiful. Wonderful works, lots of fun, full of color and ethnic melody and rhythms and whatnot, and none of that translated particularly well to large-scale forms. But his piano concerto and his violin concerto were popular. I mean, they were genuinely popular. Most violinists, and a lot of violinists anyway, and pianists did them. They were always something of a novelty. They were the special province of Soviet or Russian artists, but there was never a shortage of those, and they were international artists, so they all played these pieces. I don't know who's doing them now. I really don't. I don't think anybody's doing them now, to be honest with you. And it's a shame, because they are what they've always been: tuneful, colorful, fun to listen to. Very well written for the instruments. There's nothing wrong with them. But it seems like Russian music generally, our view of Russian music, and we'll have another example of this in a moment, has displaced some of these second-tier Russian composers. Now you've got like Rimsky, Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, and Prokofiev. And that's Russia. I mean, if you want to be more modern, I guess there's Schnittke. But basically, there's just like that five. And that's Russian music, or at least most of the vast majority of Russian music that we hear. And so there's not a lot of room for Khachaturian in that mix, and some of the other ones from that period as well. It's kind of, again, it's a little bit sad, because there's a lot of very good music. As the classical process goes on, the winnowing process, whereby we decide what's really going to survive and get played and what isn't. This is all part of that. I hate to make value judgments about these things, because we're just observing the march of history as it applies to music. And it is what it is. But it's very, very interesting to see how these pieces come and go. So after that, what's next? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Howard Hanson's Romantic Symphony. I mean, Howard Hanson, just to give you an idea, was such an iconic American composer that he actually got himself up on some of the prosceniums of concert halls. I've seen McDowell, and Hanson, along with Bach and Handel and Mozart and Sibelius, all those people, But Hanson was a big deal. And that Romantic Symphony was played to the nines. I mean, it was recorded quite a few times in the early digital era. I mean, Slatkin did one, and George Schwartz did one. I mean, I don't know of any non-American people who've taken it up, which is really a shame, because, again, it's a lovely piece with a wonderful tune that you get to hear about 30 billion times. We played it in my community orchestra, and we had a very, very good time with it. It's lovely. It's only like 25 minutes long and 3 movements. It's such a well put together, simple piece that does exactly what it promises, and then it stops. But that kind of laconic romanticism, if you want to call it that, seems to be terribly, terribly out of fashion now. Howard Hanson was a fine composer and wrote some really, really beautiful music. So the Romantic Symphony, I miss it. I miss the opportunity to see it once in a while, because my, oh my, it works wonderfully as like a first half piece, actually, or a second half piece with something to precede it. But lovely work. Next, oh yeah, similarly, back to the Russians, Borodin's Second Symphony. When was the last time you saw a new recording of that? That was another one. When you want to do a Russian symphony, if you wanted a 19th century Russian symphony that was not Tchaikovsky, you had very, very limited choices, right? Because Rimsky's 3 symphonies were never very popular. 1 and 3 are nothing special. And the Antar is pretty, but it ends quietly. And it's kind of like a trial run for Scheherazade. So, there's Balakhirov's 2 symphonies. Number 1 we heard once in a while. Number 2, almost never. I mean, Balakirev actually could be one of these composers as well. But the Borodin II is a masterpiece. Everybody agrees it's a masterpiece. It's an extraordinary piece that does not sound like Tchaikovsky, but which is a fabulous 19th century Russian symphony. And I mean, again, we played it in my community orchestra. That's where these things have gone now. This is like community orchestra repertoire if the group is good enough, because you have an opportunity to revive pieces that most people know or they've heard, or at least the 100-year-old people who come to your concerts usually have heard, and it's really kind of astonishing. So there you go for that one. Then we've got, Mendelssohn's Elijah. Now, Elijah is kind of a special case, right? Because nothing is less popular now than 19th century sacred oratorios, or any oratorio that's not by Handel, basically. And the period instrument people have revived so many of Handel's oratorios that there's like almost no room for anyone else's. Elijah is a great work. It really is. It's a wonderful piece for what it is, the kind of work that it is. And so it appeals to a certain crowd. Now, it will always have its fans. It's a big, popular number with amateur choruses and amateur choral societies. You trot out Elijah and do it. But as a piece that gets a lot of serious attention, I think it seems to be on the wane. It has had some recent recordings in the digital era. I mean, by choral conductors like Robert Shaw. And then, there was a period instrument kind of sort of one. And just to show whether they could do it. And it was very good. It was really quite wonderful on Decca. So it hasn't completely disappeared, but it used to be ubiquitous, and now I don't think so. I think the march of history, and particularly the period instrument thing, and our view of these types of works and the composers who wrote them has shifted away from the 19th century. It was always a tough period for sacred oratorios. Remember, there were millions of them, and most of them were just dreadful. At least the ones I've heard were. But Elijah was really first-class music, and a very, very well put together and effective piece of writing. And it does not deserve, in my view, to be increasingly sidelined. And while we're talking about England, William Walton. Boy, is his star faded. Whoa, baby. And I'm talking particularly about the Violin Concerto. The symphonies have done okay. At least Symphony No. 1 has done okay. Belshazzar's Feast has always done okay. The Viola Concerto always does okay because there are only so many Viola Concertos, so that's one of the very greatest ones. But the Violin Concerto is a very, very interesting case in my view. I heard it lots of times back in the days when I used to go to symphony concerts in like the 70s. In the early 80s, it was fairly frequently programmed. It was written for Jascha Heifetz. And Heifetz took it up and made a recording of it, of course. And, of course, all the other violinists after that had to do it because Heifetz did it. Well, now Heifetz is long gone. And that Violin Concerto has been replaced. I mean, you hear the Prokofiev Violin Concertos, you hear Bartók, you hear the Shostakovich Violin Concertos. But the Walton, I haven't even seen it mentioned in, like, decades. I mean, the last time... who did it? I think Joshua Bell made a recording of it on Decca, a very good one. But it was coupled with like Korngold and Barber, as I recall, and it's one of the great 20th century violin concertos. But it seems that the violinists who knew it, Kyung-Hwa Chung and people like that generation of post Heifetzian younger virtuosi. That took it up, but they're now older and they made their recordings, and the current crop doesn't seem to be terribly interested. which is a shame because, quite frankly, violinists need all the good concertos they can find because there aren't many, and so they should be more respectful. So after Walton, Hovhaness. He's another guy who had 15 minutes of fame, and his second symphony, Mysterious Mountain. Boy, did that was popular in the 50s and the 60s. I mean, Fritz Reiner recorded it, Stokowski played it, everybody wanted to do it. Everyone's looking for a pretty American symphony that you could do, and did that one fill the bill. It is gorgeous. It sounds a lot like the Vaughan Williams Tallis Fantasia, actually. It's all that luscious modal harmony and whatnot. Incredibly beautiful. And then Hovhaness went on to write like 175 more symphonies. And Naxos and Seattle under Gerard Schwartz had a huge, Hovhaness series that started on the Koch label. And a lot of his music got recorded. And then everyone realized that all of it sounded like all of the rest of it quite often. Now, it's nothing wrong with that, particularly if you like the rest of it. If you like his sound, then you're going to enjoy the rest of it. You're going to enjoy everything else. I like Hovhaness. I think he had a very personal and distinctive style. Sometimes his music is just relentlessly flabby and uninteresting because it sounds like he's treading water in that style. Other times it's really fun. He's like everybody else. He had his good days and his off days. Mysterious Mountain is a beautiful, beautiful work, a lovely work, and it's easy to program. I mean, his music is almost never technically that difficult, and it's relatively brief in duration, and it's traditional in form. He writes like fugues and simple contrapuntal forms, and the orchestral forces are usually limited. It's like strings and some brass and winds and a little percussion, but not anything like ridiculous and grandiose. It's easy to do and easy to do well. It always sounds. He was a fascinating character, and I think his music, there's a lot of it. There's tons of it, so you have to dig around in it. But most of what I've heard, there's a lot more good stuff than bad stuff. Let's put it that way. And last but not least, this may be the most fun, Cilea, Adriana Lecouvreur. We got to have an operatic entry, don't we? Adriana was the Verismo opera for Over the Hill Sopranos, because the lead character, she's got suicide, suicidio, and she's going crazy, and she's dying for like half of the opera and taking poison and God knows what else. And the point is, what makes Adriana so wonderful is that the part has a rather low tessitura. So you get to scream and spit and carry on like a lunatic without ever having to go that high. So it's very good for sopranos who want to have a farewell concert. And it's been the subject of great controversy. I think, who was it? Rosa Poncel, I think, who, when she wanted to retire with Adriana Lecouvreur, and the Met said no, and so she quit opera entirely. Or one of those people. There was some story like that about it. It was one of those operas. And the composer Cilea lived forever. We could also talk about Giordano and Andrea Chenier and Fedora and those people, all the operas that were written for Magda, what was her name? Magda Olivero, who lived to be like 85 and still sang everything. And, it's just the Verismo style of opera, the generation of Verismo Italian composers is on the outs. They really are. There was Cilea, Mascagni, but Zandonai and Leone, and they wrote tons and tons of opera. Mascagni's Iris. Remember that? Who was it? Eva Martone or one of those people, or Ilona Tokori, the Hungarian soprano. Somebody revived it for Sony under like Eve Queller, one of those people who did all that unusual opera, and they would bring it back and we would get to hear it. It was fabulous, but they could orchestrate like crazy. They wrote big, glitzy, gorgeous, lovely things that were completely nonsensical, and they involved a lot of yelling and screaming. That's sort of like, the Italian Verismo school is kind of like the English 19th century sacred oratorio school. They have faded. They have faded terribly. And it's a shame because there was a lot of beautiful music there. There really was. Adriana Lecouvreur is a beautiful opera. It really is by a really admittedly second-rate composer. I don't even think Cilea thought he was a very good composer, but he churned out one. And boy, has that not been heard from in a very, very, very long time. Really, really fun. Absolutely fun. But, what can we do? So there you have it, my friends. 10 works that used to be quite, quite popular, but seem to have lost favor, either with the public or with concert promoters or with history or fate or karma or whatever you want to call it. And if you have some ideas for some, which used to be quite popular, but we don't hear from very frequently, please feel free to let me know what they are. One of the people, by the way, mentioned Soupe overtures, which is a wonderful pick, because we used to hear those all the time too. And now, hoof, Poet and Peasant, Light Cavalry, nowhere. So yeah, a lot of really good music that we don't get to hear anymore. But we will listen to it, because we will keep on listening, right, friends? Thank you, and take care.